My friends asked me to be the 2025 Superman, the movie version of Hawkgirl. But unfortunately for me, I could not be normal about that. So that meant I had to make as scientifically accurate wings as possible because I'm a freak and I am a natural science illustrator that took 2 classes on birds. So I couldn't not do that because then what did I get my certification for? To draw? Huh, ridiculous. I'm gonna make scientifically accurate wings. That's what my certification's for, obviously. I did do all of the primary and secondary feathers, so all these feathers, these big feathers. Once you get closer to the smaller feathers, we got less accurate, but the big ones were the ones that were important to me. So this is my general Hawkgirl cosplay process. It is mostly the wings because that was most of the time. Out of the 3 months it took me to do this cosplay, about 2 3/4 of that was just making feathers. So was that a normal way to use my time? Absolutely not. Did I love it? Yes, I did. Yes. It was so fun. This lunch was just so you know what I'm doing and why I did it. Why I did it? I'm a freak. It's fine. But if you also want to embark on this journey, you're a freak too, and it's okay. Like Pinocchio said, let your freak flag fly. Am I right, ladies? Do I recommend it? Some of it. But I hope you guys can get some kind of good information from this. If anything, just one of those fun little like, what are you doing? But yes. I used this reference picture to figure out how big I wanted the mace. It came out to 3 paper towel rolls for the whole thing. This is from the bottom of the handle to the end of the ball, not including spikes. I cut a line in all the tubes, and then used masking tape to roll them a little tighter, and then use more masking tape to connect them. Connecting them end to end would be too weak, so they are overlapping. Then I wrapped the whole thing in masking tape, and had a toilet paper roll folded in half on the end. For the ball, I found a sewing pattern and used that as my template to make it out of cardstock. But because it's cardstock and not fabric, I had to cut all these little notches and then tape that to make a ball. And of course, that left me with a very wonky ball. I made spikes with more cardstock and tape, hoping that would make it look at least a little bit even, and I think it helped quite a bit. I left a hole at the bottom of the ball so I could stick it into the handle. To give it weight and stability, I stuffed both the ball and the handle with paper bag and hot glued them together. And then paper mache'd the whole ball, starting at the base to make sure it was nice and secure. It's hard to see, but so I don't squish the spikes, I'm rotating between placing it inside of a cup and tape rolls. And then I slide up and hot glue another piece of paper towel roll at the joint of the ball and the handle. After hand sewing a scrap of pleather as a wrist strap, I end up with this. I spray the whole thing with plastidip and paint with acrylic using the same method I did for the mask. For the mask, I started with making the inner eye holes out of paper towel roll and held a giant piece of newsprint to my head and marked out the shape I wanted. I suggest wearing earbuds because this method is very loud. Once I cut it out, I end up with this. After cutting out a second piece, I put both of them on my head and start mapping out how I want the rest of the helmet to look. I basically end up sculpting using masking tape and paper because once it was on, the shape wasn't quite what I was going for. I was mostly having problems with the shape of the wing and how much it stuck out my head and the connection between that and the back of the mask. Once I was looking how I wanted, I used it as a pattern to then cut it out using foam, and I got this. This is shaped specifically for my head, but I did cut it out a little bigger just to give myself wiggle room. So this should be at least a good jumping off point if you want to use this pattern. It's held together using masking tape, and here you can see before and after inserting the inner eye holes, and then sprayed with plastidip. To shape it and have it form to my face, I use a hairdryer. As you can see, I tried it before using the plastidip, but it won't hold until afterwards. I'm painting it using acrylic paint, making sure all the brush strokes are going the same way. I do multiple layers of a true gold as the base. I'm also not too worried about the black peeking through or not being a solid gold. I go over most of the mask using a bronze, focusing on areas that are more likely to get scuffed up or dirty. The bronze brush strokes go the same direction as the gold. I do a few layers of this, not enough to change the color of the mask, but enough to give it texture. If you haven't noticed, I went mostly for the shape and the pattern of the animated series, but the coloring of the live action movie. Step one was the planning, so I knew I wanted it to be as scientifically accurate as possible. So I looked up a bunch of references of red-tailed hawk wings and then also raw chicken wings, so I understood, okay, so more or less what would be the meat, the literal meat of the wing. Therefore, that piece would be my equivalent to fabric. So I used some of those references and put them on me digitally, just so I get an idea of portions and what structures would make sense for that size. I love going to discount stores, especially with fallout, like logic in mind, right? So if you scrap a radio, you get metal and circuitry there, right? So with that logic, I'm gonna scrap a pillowcase for fabric, right? And then this wreath for wire. That's what I'm doing like this whole cosplay with, because I'm not 100% sure what I know I'm doing, but I do love to test things out. And if it doesn't work out, it was only like $1 or whatever for the component, the thing. And it's added to my trash bin, my good trash bin, because I'm getting this knowing I'm getting good trash that I could use for another project later. So yes, excited. I use some pliers to take apart that wreath, and I get a bunch of different lengths of pretty sturdy wire. I do recommend using some kind of gardening glove because I kept getting stabbed by the connecting wire. None of the wires are the same size, so I did trim some of them, but this is the bones I came up with, and then I used half a pillowcase per wing. Then I whip stitched that fabric onto the wire to hold it all together. And once trimmed, I ended up with this. As you can see, I was very excited, but it is a little flimsy, so I do have to add wire later, but it's giving the exact shape and size I was looking for. And then I use a foam roller, also from Dollar Tree, and it just kind of snaps in there with the curve of the wire. This becomes a problem later because I can't really control where the wings go, but I do love the movement. And now for the thing that took me forever, hand making the feathers. I wrap yarn around my hand and then cut them to around the same size, and then I pull apart each strand, which is 4 strands per piece of yarn, and I keep doing that over and over again until I get a big old pile. The shaft of the primary and secondary feathers are 24-inch zip ties. The primary feathers get floral wire to help fight against gravity, and I hot glue those on a low heat setting so I don't burn myself too much. When those are ready, I hot glue a layer of yarn onto the zip tie, and then I use glue to shape the yarn. At first I used tacky glue, but then I found out that Elmer School glue worked better, dried faster, and didn't yellow the feathers. This size, I do it 20 more times without wire, 18 times with, and then 2 times directly on the wing. It's hard to see, but I did kind of draw it in the carpet. I'm just kind of pushing around. There's the first 5 wings, the primary wings go over here, and then the next 5 here, and then at this point we get to the secondary wings. So I don't need to make them that long for these. These are going to have a wire in them, so they still stick out, so keep the shape. Maybe these, but for sure the secondary, it's going to be held down by gravity, so it doesn't need that extra support. At this point I realized the bones are too weak and I have to deconstruct another wreath. I had that wire by whip stitching it around the original bones and skin and wrap the bottom with some tape to make sure it keeps its shape. I do this on both and end up with 2 slightly sturdier wings. I make the first feather directly on the extra wire. Just me being a freak, so they're all separated out by, these are the inside wings, so no wire, outside wings, so with wire, and they're separated by more or less the same, like, shape. And then once I figure out which shape works best for which feather, I'm gonna place them, and I'm gonna have probably some numbers system or something, so they're even. And then I'll trim them to size. Yippee! This is how it looks laid out and pinned. And then I have the matching feathers off to the side in order so I can mirror it on the other wing. I hand sew the feathers and alternate which side of the fabric they go on. That way one side of the wing doesn't look too bald when it's done. Use a close-up so you can see I used a ladder stitch with the flat side of the zip tie facing the fabric. And now for my favorite part, the research. Yes! My source is the Red-tailed Hawk Project, where they track the birds across all of North America, and most importantly for us, they documented their plumage. I got to look at a bunch of pictures of hawks, And I chose this one as my main inspiration, partially because of the face. It made me crack up, but also because it's the only one we get the front and back of the wing, so we got a really good reference right here. I add their patterning on the primary and secondary wings using acrylic paint. I sew on the rest of the feathers off screen, and then I add these little tiny feathers made out of felt to add to the bald spot at the top of the wing. And this is what we got so far. I used around 2 packs of the 11-inch zip ties and 1 pack of the 8-inch. To blend in the felt, I sewed a little bit of yarn together on the machine and then hand sewed that over the felt. For the spray paint, I used a sandy brown, and I started a little farther so I could just build a layer of paint. And then we get closer for the darker parts of the feathers. I was even able to get some of the patterning done with that spray paint. And here are the wings, helmet, and mace all painted. The wings are attached by an old Dollar Tree backpack that is covered with the same fabric as the outfit, and a strap that goes along my bra line with a Velcro closure. Once I put the backpack on, I weave the strap through the armholes and close it under my shirt so you can't see it. And the wings are attached to the backpack through the paint rollers in perfectly sized pockets. They were drooping a lot more than I liked, so I used some clear stretch cord to attach them together so they could support themselves a bit. They're not perfect, but I love how they came out, and they're so much fun to wear. They're also not too heavy, and the strap is doing a lot of work by stabilizing them and distributing the weight throughout my back. But yeah, that's how I make my Hawkgirl cosplay. If you have any questions, please let me know. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed, and see you later. Bye!